Hello, I'm Jeremy, and welcome to another episode of Jeremy U's Reviews, where mistreated movies get a second chance. So episodes of the actual series take a long time to make, and since these mini-reviews videos have been getting decent views, I figure in between episodes I could make mini-reviews videos to pass the time between new episodes. So let's start talking about things I've watched recently. This is Mini-Reviews, Part 4. You know how shows like Aqua Teen Hunger Force and 12 Ounce Mouse just completely ignore reality? Well, Three Busy Debras doesn't just ignore reality, it straight up gives reality the middle finger. And it is glorious. Every episode of this series is so ridiculously crazy. It's the type of show where anything and everything can happen. A lot of the jokes are built around subverting expectations, and because of this, we get some legit hilarious moments which I won't spoil in this video. The characters are also great. The titular Debras are three of the best examples of how to make intentionally unlikable characters. These gals are terrible people, but not only does the show acknowledge it, but the Debras themselves pretty much own their terribleness, which leads to some very funny scenes. And their dynamic is constantly changing. Going back to Aqua Teen Hunger Force, while that show is full of ridiculous insanity, the dynamic between Frylock, Master Shake, and Meatwad remains the same. But in TBD, the dynamic between the Debras rarely stays the same. Sometimes they're friends, sometimes they hate each other's guts, sometimes they relentlessly bully one of them. Heck, in one episode, they get into a love triangle with each other. It's really interesting and adds to the insanity of the show. And speaking of insanity, the town of Lemon Curd, which Three Busy Debras takes place in, might be the most crazy fictional town ever. Not only is every other character just as mentally unbalanced as the Debras, but there is so much about this town that doesn't make sense. For example, the gender politics are so backwards that a woman actually fought for women to not vote. There's an ATM explosion that happens every couple of years, and the food court is an actual court where food is sentenced to be eaten. And that's not even the weirdest stuff that happens in this town. Three Busy Debras is a fantastic show. The comedy is hilarious, the characters are enjoyable, and you never know what's going to happen. If you're an Adult Swim fan or want something new, give this show a watch. It's an incredibly fun piece of awesomeness that's one of my new favorite Adult Swim shows. Tammy and the T-Rex is a perfect film for bad movie night. The premise is absolutely ridiculous, with Michael, played by the late Paul Walker, having his brain transplanted into the body of a robotic dinosaur by a crazed scientist played by Terry Kaiser, who also played Bernie in Weekend at Bernie's. The characters, while likable, are all incredibly goofy, especially Byron, who's one of the most stereotypical gay characters ever. The humor is incredibly goofy and ridiculous, and there are some truly bananas scenes. There's a scene where Michael and the antagonist Billy fight by grabbing each other's private parts. There's a scene where one of the cops almost calls Byron, who is the police chief's son, the other F word. And by the way, that scene is in the trailer. And there's a scene where one of the scientists, played by John Franklin, best known for playing Cousin It in Addams Family 1991 and Addams Family Values, and Isaac in Children of the Corn, makes fun of Michael while he is in a gigantic robotic dinosaur that can kill him, which does end up happening. And don't even get me started on the scene where the Michael dinosaur is dialing a phone. It looks so stupid. But despite that, the film does have some genuinely good elements that adds to its charm. The characters are really likable and the actors do the best they can. There are some genuinely funny moments and the gore is so cartoonish that it's amazing. Bottom line, Tammy and the T-Rex is one of the most beautifully bad films in existence. And is a film that needs to be seen. It's goofy, it's strange, it's ridiculous, and by God, I love it. Check it out. I love Kids in the Hall. They are one of my favorite comedy groups. Their style of humor, while not for everyone, is funny, creative, ridiculous, and enjoyably absurd. In fact, I plan on reviewing their feature film, Kids in the Hall Brain Candy, in a future episode. But until then, we're talking about Amazon Prime's new Kids in the Hall show. And it's just so freaking great. Not only did the Kids in the Hall crew age really well, but they're still just as funny as they were in the original show. The sketches in Kids in the Hall 2022 are incredibly goofy, creative, and enjoyably ridiculous. From Bruce McCulloch playing a drunk superhero named Super Drunk, to a sketch where Dave Foley plays a DJ in an apocalyptic wasteland, to a sketch where Kevin McDonald and Dave Foley are in a love triangle with an imaginary girlfriend. Every sketch is just so creative and fun. I also like how the first episode not only references Brain Candy, but has Don Rorator, once again played by Mark McKinney, making a return. And I also like how the series begins with the kids being dug up from the grave they were buried in during the series finale of the original show. It gives this show a nice circular feeling. And I also like the Friends of Kids in the Hall segments, as they're very funny and add an element to Kids in the Hall 2022 that makes it stand out from the original, and the people they get for them are very funny and talented. Kids in the Hall 2022 is a very funny show that's a worthy successor to its 1980s original. The cast is great, the sketches are creative, and it manages to be different enough to stand out. If you're a Kids in the Hall fan, like weird and silly sketch shows, or are looking for something new, head to Amazon Prime and check this awesome show out. Great job, Kids in the Hall. I look forward to your return when I talk about Brain Candy.
Listen to the magic man, and abracadabra, your life's in Cinderella.
The peanut butter solution is one of the most gloriously insane things I've ever seen in my life. Like Tammy and the T-Rex, the premise is absolutely insane, with a kid named Michael losing his hair through some BS called a harem scarum and trying to get his hair back. However, while Tammy and the T-Rex takes place in a world that's semi-grounded in reality, the peanut butter solution is just straight off the deep end. While the actors are all doing a good job, the characters they play range from normal but a tad off to straight up insane. My favorite character is easily the antagonist, simply named the Signor. The Signor is basically like if Albert Einstein got drunk and decided to be a substitute teacher. This dude is absolutely insane, and Michael Maliotte, I'm probably mispronouncing that, really gives the character life. And on top of that, the film is just so charming and fun. There's a unique atmosphere and otherworldly feel to the peanut butter solution that really separates it from other films in a similar vein. And if, like me, you're sick and tired of PG's meaning going from parental guidance to, gee, but we don't want our audience to think this film is for babies, then this film is for you, because the peanut butter solution gets pretty freaking dark. Not Return to Oz levels, but pretty dark. Two of the main characters are literal homeless ghosts. There's a creepy as hell nightmare sequence flashing back to previous events. The Signor is such a creeper. Michael's friend Conrad describes a house that was on fire in a way that sounds less like he's describing a fire and more like he's describing an episode of his favorite TV show. And the Signor's plan, which I kid you not, is kidnapping Michael and kidnapping a bunch of other kids so he could put them in a sweatshop so they can make Michael's hair into paintbrushes that make paintings you can literally walk into. I am not kidding. That is actually his plan. The peanut butter solution is just incredible. It's such a surreal, charming, nonsensical piece of awesomeness that really needs to be seen to be believed. Check it out. You won't regret it for a second. And yes, that was Celine Dion singing that song earlier. If you're a fan of Inside Job, like I am, the Pentaverate is an absolute must check out. The show tackles similar conspiracy theory themes, albeit in a less direct way, and it has a similar quirky sense of humor. And like with Inside Job, the characters really enhance the show. The 5 members of the Pentaverate are all very interesting and filled with personality. Ken Scarborough is a perfect example of how to make a goody-goody main character, as well he is a very kind, well-intentioned person, unlike Chloe Carmichael from Fairly Odd Parents, who's a whiny Mary Sue who acts like she's better than everyone else. Ken is a lot more humble, feels like a real human being, and makes mistakes. Patty is a very interesting character, as while she looks like a typical secretary character on the surface, she's actually one of the more intelligent characters in the show. Mentor is a hilarious take on the supercomputer trope. Keegan-Michael Kay is fantastic as Dr. Hobart Clark. Skip Cho I was mixed on at first, as Ken Jeong's performance kind of towed the line between funny and annoying, but I grew to like him over time. And Rob Lowe and Maria Menounos have really funny cameo appearances. I also love the story. The story of the Pentaverate is really engaging, with a really cool murder mystery element, a ton of suspense, and really interesting twists. And as for the humor, it's funny as heck. Myers proves that he's still got comedic chops, as this show is full of jokes that not only don't disrupt the seriousness of the story, but are legit hilarious. From funny lines, to off-the-wall meta jokes, to silly and immature jokes, to a freaking Shrek cameo. They're incredibly funny jokes that make a great show even better. The Pentaverate is just awesome. The characters are interesting, the comedy is top-notch, the story is incredibly engaging, and it's just so incredibly entertaining. If you have Netflix, I highly recommend giving this show a watch. It's only 6 episodes, so it's a pretty easy watch, and by God is it worth every second. Great job, Michael Myers.
Why is fluid leaking from my eye? Why do I ache with shame while moaning Watson's name? Wish I could deduce the reason why.
Holmes and Watson is a film I've been curious about for a while, as it's one of the most infamous comedies of the 2010s. It bombed spectacularly, has a 10% on Rotten Tomatoes, and won the Razzie for Worst Picture of 2018. Although these movies also won Worst Picture of their respective years, although Howard the Duck was technically a tie. So that's definitely something to take with a grain of salt. And after watching the film, I can say that Holmes and Watson is far from perfect, but it's still an effective film. Let's start with the positives. I really like Will Ferrell and John C. Reilly as Holmes and Watson. They remind me of Eddie and Tony from Hudson Hawk, eccentric idiots who live in their own little world. They play off each other well, and their chemistry leads to some very funny moments. They also have a musical number near the climax, and my God, is it absolutely fantastic. It's incredibly funny, catchy, and enjoyably theatrical. Also, the mystery is very well set up. Despite the film's ridiculous nature, the mystery is pretty engaging and suspenseful, adding to the overall enjoyment of the film. And when the mystery is revealed, it's a pretty interesting twist that I didn't see coming. And there are also some pretty good jokes. The comedy in this film is a mixed bag, and I'll discuss the bad elements later, but when the film has a good joke, it's pretty clever. Moments like Watson trying to brain think, Sherlock trying on different hats, and Sherlock saying that Grace couldn't be the killer because since she was an American, she would have used a gun are legit pretty funny. They're not amazing jokes, but when H&W works, it really works. I also like the costumes. They fit well with the Sherlock Holmes aesthetic and are silly enough to fit the film's comedic tone. As for the negatives, while I do like Ferrell's portrayal of Sherlock, he does occasionally act too jerkish for his own good, especially towards Watson. The dude literally poisons Watson just to figure out the effects of a specific type of poison. I'm not kidding, that actually happens. Also, Sherlock constantly belittles Watson and laughs at the idea of them working together as co-detectives. And while this is done for character growth purposes, and Holmes does learn to appreciate Watson more, the film pushes it to the point where Holmes appears to value Watson as much as a piece of mud on his boot, which doesn't make him sympathetic. And he can also be pretty thick-headed. The scene of Sherlock trying on hats is funny, but the fact that he's doing this while missing his court date paints him as an inconsiderate doofus, and not in a funny way. And as for the comedy, for every joke that does work, there's another one that doesn't work. The bad jokes in this film are forgettable, flat, could have used a better execution, confusing, or just incredibly on the nose. Also, the climax takes place on the Titanic, which, even for this film, is just ridiculous. Holmes and Watson is a film where all of the bad elements and all of the good elements blend together to make an alright experience. I definitely understand why this film got a lot of scorn, but I'm not going to say I didn't enjoy it, as I definitely did. The comedy, when it works, is very good. Farrell and Riley are good in the title roles, and the mystery is pretty effective. It's not an amazing comedic masterpiece, but in terms of comedy films, you could do a lot worse. If you like Will Ferrell and John C. Reilly, or are looking for a goofy Sherlock Holmes spoof, you might like this film. Just don't expect an amazing comedic masterpiece. And speaking of infamous comedies...
What can I be? Michael Owen! I wanna be Michael Owen! What can I be? Michael Owen!
Like Holmes and Watson, an Alan Smithee film, Burn Hollywood Burn, won the Razzie for Worst Picture of its respective year, in this case, 1999. And like Holmes and Watson, while I do like Burn Hollywood Burn, I completely get why it's gotten a lot of hate. But let's start with what I like. The premise is incredibly clever. The idea of a director rejecting a film but not being able to use the name Alan Smithee because his name actually is Alan Smithee is a genius idea, and the film utilizes it in an interesting way. See, Burn Hollywood Burn is a mockumentary, meaning it uses a documentary format but in a satirical way, similar to This Is Spinal Tap and Best in Show. And while nowhere near as good as those mockumentaries, Burn Hollywood Burn is still very interesting. Seeing all the characters describe how these events transpired is very interesting, and I especially like the characters of James Edmonds and Jerry Glover, as they're very funny, and Ryan O'Neal and Richard Jenney do good jobs in their respective roles. Speaking of roles, Eric Idle plays the titular Alan Smithee, and he's freaking fantastic. He's both enjoyably unhinged and decently soft-spoken, making the character of Alan Smithee feel very dynamic. And there are a ton of really funny celebrity cameos as well. So if I have all these positive things to say about the film, what are the negatives? Well, let's start with easily the worst part about an Alan Smithee film, Burn Hollywood Burn, the soundtrack. It's not really that the songs themselves are bad, except for I Wanna Be Mike Ovitz by Magic Kingdom. That song blows chunks. It's more that it feels like they just picked a bunch of songs from a hat and slapped them on certain scenes for no reason. Like, in one scene, there's a song about getting condoms for Christmas that's playing in the background. What does that have to do with anything? Secondly, we never see footage of Trio, the film Alan Smithee wants to reject. Not only would I really want to see what an action film starring Whoopi Goldberg, Sylvester Stallone, and Jackie Chan would be like, it would still probably be better than Stop or My Mom Will Shoot, but because we don't ever know what Trio is like, we don't know whether the film really is as bad as Smithee claims, or if he's just being egotistical. Thus, we don't know who to root for. Also, one of the characters is played by this guy. I'm not going to elaborate any further, just screw this guy. An Alan Smithee film, Burn Hollywood Burn, is far from a perfect movie, but it is a very interesting one. The premise is very clever, the acting is good, and the mockumentary style really enhances the film. If you're a film buff or interested in something odd and abnormal, give Burn Hollywood Burn a watch. There truly is nothing like it. Somewhere in Time is a freaking phenomenal movie. Let's start with easily the best part, the cinematography. This movie looks gorgeous. So many shots in this movie look like a painting. They are so visually distinct, creatively shot, and so vibrant that even a neutral color like the brown on Richard Collier's jacket can pop out at the viewer. But the cinematography isn't the only great thing about this movie. The main characters are also great. Christopher Reeve plays the aforementioned Richard Collier, and he's great in the role. Collier exhibits the same mannerisms, kindness, and likability that made Reeve so good at playing Superman, and he has great chemistry with his love interest, Elise McKenna, played by Jane Seymour. I also really like the time travel element. See, the plot of the film revolves around Collier going back in time. But since a time machine wouldn't have fit the film's more serious tone, the time travel is done through hypnosis, which is a pretty creative idea. And the story is also executed very well. There's a ton of atmosphere throughout the film, and some pretty solid setup and payoff. And the twist is so full of tragic irony that Rod Serling would be proud. The only problem with this film is there are a lot of unintentional questions that get raised. Like, did Richard actually travel back in time, or was it just a delusion brought off by hypnosis? Not to mention, he was literally going to live in 1912 all because of a girl. Like, Collier, I get it, you're in love, but you're from the year 1980. A lot happened between 1912 and 1980. But that's not really what you're meant to think about. See, Somewhere in Time isn't really a traditional time travel film in the same way something like Back to the Future is. It's more of a Groundhog Day type of film, where the film is less about the supernatural element itself and more what results from that supernatural element. And while those questions I brought up are entirely valid, they don't really matter in the grand scheme of things. You're just meant to enjoy this sweet romance. Somewhere in Time is a really good movie. The acting is good, the atmosphere is potent, the script is nice, and by God, this film looks amazing. It's honestly worth seeing just for the cinematography alone. Truly a pristine, fine work of art. Anyways, here's a silly stoner comedy from the guy who sang Emo Girl.
I wrote a letter to myself in the form of a song I can play when the sun shines. I know better than to trust anything that I say to myself when I'm this high.
So, Machine Gun Kelly made a movie. And it's freaking great. Good Mourning is a film that perfectly captures Dude, Where's My Car and Cheech and Chong-esque stoner comedies while still being its own thing. MGK's character, London Clash, is pretty likable. As well, he's not the most moral character, he's pretty laid back and plays a good straight man to the crazy stuff that's going on, yet is still dim enough to do some enjoyably stupid things. Speaking of which, the humor is freaking hilarious. I can definitely understand someone finding the humor of Good Mourning too stupid to be funny, but I laughed at 90% of the jokes in this film. They're just so dumb and enjoyably ridiculous. I also like how the film utilizes big-lipped alligator moments. A lot of the jokes are tiny bursts of ridiculousness that never get addressed again. Like, there's literally a scene where London stumbles upon a ritual sacrifice. They act all casual, London leaves, and it's just never mentioned again. And while a lot of the characters make pretty stupid decisions, like smoking a bunch of weed to cover up breaking a bunch of urns, or one of London's friends, Leo, wearing an elephant mask to fool a director into thinking he's London, it makes sense in this case because this is a stupid stoner comedy. Sure, these plans are stupid, but that's the joke. I also like the chemistry London has with his friends. It's pretty believable and they all interact off each other well. Not to mention, the film has various celebrity cameos, from Trippie Redd to Avril Lavigne to Danny Trejo to Tom Arnold, and they're all really funny. And the fact that London is auditioning to be the next Batman is hilarious. I mean, could you imagine this guy playing Batman? I mean, he'd certainly be better than George Clooney. There are only 3 problems with the film. 1, it is so obvious from the get-go that the text London gets that sets this whole crazy adventure going is a misunderstanding. And the scene where it's revealed is so contrived and stupid. 2, certain jokes take forever to get to the punchline. For example, in the beginning, London mentions that one of his friends, Dylan, played by co-director Maud's son, thinks that Avril Lavigne wrote Skater Boy about him. And near the end of the movie, there's a scene where Dylan meets Avril and she confirms that she wrote Skater Boy about him. That's a funny joke, but it's a punchline to a setup that was so early in the film, the viewer pretty much forgot about it, lessening the humor that the joke could have provided. And 3, the character of Sabrina is a pointless deus ex machina. But those are minor things that don't really affect the film that much. Overall, Good Mourning is a ridiculously dumb and enjoyably silly stoner comedy. The plot is ridiculous, the characters are fun, the humor is hilarious, and like Free Guy, it's a simple comedy that just focuses on being funny, which I really appreciate in this day and age. If you're a stoner comedy fan or want something ridiculous, give this film a watch. Great job, MGK.
The day that I met you, I lost a piece of my heart. Now I got you here, nothing's gonna keep us apart.
While I'm not an absolute Gumby fanatic, I do remember watching some Gumby when I was a kid. It's very fun, laid back, and creative. As for the movie, it is trippy as hell. Like Tammy and the T-Rex and the Peanut Butter Solution, Gumby the Movie is perfect for bad movie night, as it checks off all the so bad it's good properties. The idea of logic or coherency or reality just straight up don't exist in this world. You will find yourself asking so many questions that will never get an answer. Like, why are some of the characters amorphous clay creatures while others are creepy clay human hybrids? Why are the blockheads mute when literally every other humanoid creature can talk? Why do walls exist when apparently anybody can just walk through buildings? How are the blockheads able to create perfect robot duplicates of the other Gumby characters? Why are we treating the Clay Boys like main characters when they have never been in any Gumby-related thing other than this? Why does Gumby's manager look like Groucho Marx? And how exactly does the city of Gumbasia work? Is it all a fantasy world? Are they all in a story? Do they know they're in a story? All questions you will never get answers for. The dialogue is also incredibly bizarre. I don't know how to explain it, but the characters in this film don't really speak right. They speak in this weird flow, and the dialogue just feels incredibly unnatural. Also, the film can get unnecessarily dark in places. But unlike the Peanut Butter Solution, where the darkness figured into the plot, here the dark stuff is completely irrelevant. For example, there's a scene where Pokey, Prickle, and Goo get jumbled together into one gigantic clump of clay, resulting in doctors trying to split them apart. And this scene has nothing to do with the plot whatsoever. And I still have no idea why it's there. Oh, and to top it all off, racist Native American stereotypes. Because this film wasn't weird enough. Gumby the Movie is an absolute trip. While three busy Debras, Tammy and the T-Rex and the Peanut Butter Solution, all know that they're ridiculous piles of insanity, Gumby the Movie is blissfully unaware of how weird it really is. Which makes it incredibly fascinating. It's just such a bizarre piece of claymation trippiness that I'm shocked isn't talked about more. If anything I've said interested you, please give Gumby the Movie a watch. There really is nothing like it.
Listen when I tell you, there's more than meets the eye. So take a closer look to find a real good guy.
So, fun fact, I actually read the books that this movie was based on. Not all of them, but enough to give my opinions. I really liked them. They had an interesting premise, likable characters, a cool art style, and some fun humor. And the movie captures all that pretty well. Let's start with the part that everybody praises, the animation. While I wouldn't call this animation the best I've ever seen, it's still pretty darn great. It's a perfect blending of 3D and 2D animation that still remains loyal to the style of the original books, similar to another awesome DreamWorks film based on a book that I read. The characters are also great. Each character, despite representing a specific trope, is incredibly unique, likable, and enjoyable, complemented by phenomenal voice acting. You can clearly hear the passion these actors had while filming this movie, as they all bring their A-game. Also, I find it interesting that Miss Tarantula is played by Awkwafina, who was also in the very underrated Ocean's 8. It's probably a coincidence, but it's still cool nonetheless. The humor is also really funny. There are a ton of solid jokes that are executed in a ton of interesting ways, from clever and snappy interactions to enjoyably absurd moments to fun and meta-fourth wall breaks. The film really knows how to pack in as much humor as it can, and execute said humor in a great way. And the film is also very suspenseful and action-packed. So many scenes left me on the edge of my seat in the best way possible, really invested in wanting to know what happens next. There are only two problems with the film. One, the fact that this is a world where some characters are human and others are anthropomorphic animals opens up a ton of questions. Like, at one point in the film, we see a gerbil testing facility. Is that like this world's version of a sweatshop? And two, while there was a lot of stuff I didn't see coming, there were certain points of the film that were boringly predictable. Be honest, you knew who the villain was going to be the second you saw the trailer for this film. But again, those are nitpicks, and don't even come close to ruining this awesome movie. The Bad Guys is a great movie. Like Good Mourning, it's just a simple comedy, albeit one for a very different audience, that focuses on being fun and enjoyable, nothing more, nothing less. The animation is stunning, the characters are great, the humor is fun, and it's just so immersive and easy to get invested in. Definitely one of my favorite films of 2022, and one I highly recommend. Great job, DreamWorks, keep up the good work. And that's it. Comment below your thoughts on these films and some other awesome TV shows and movies you saw this year, and I'll see you in my next video. Take care!